Mr. Mackenzie, I'm Sergeant Santos. Thank you for saving us. Yes.
Just to keep you from...
The Hermit veterans' secret bunker. What the 10 female soldiers found inside shocked them. The wind howled across the Colorado mountains with the fury of a living thing as 10 female soldiers from the 47th Mountain Division struggled through the worst blizzard in 50 years, their GPS systems useless and their radio communications dead, while hypothermia crept into their bones like a stalking predator. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos led her team through the whiteout, following compass bearings that seemed to shift with each gust of wind when the outline of what appeared to be a simple hunting shelter emerged from the storm like a mirage. But the gruff, bearded man who answered their desperate knocks was no ordinary hermit, and the modest cabin concealed something that would not only save their lives, but transform them into the heroes a nearby town desperately needed. What they discovered hidden beneath the floorboards would challenge everything they thought they knew about preparation, ingenuity, and the extraordinary lengths one man would go to protect complete strangers from disasters they couldn't even imagine. Sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones who spend their lives preparing for the moment when everyone else has given up hope. The blizzard struck with the sudden violence of nature unleashed, transforming the Colorado wilderness into a white hell that swallowed landmarks and turned every direction into a death trap. 10 female soldiers, their faces numb with cold and their ammunition frozen solid, stumbled through drifts that reached their waists while the wind shrieked like a banshee overhead. Thomas Bear Mackenzie opened his cabin door to reveal a man who looked like he had stepped out of a survivalist magazine, 6 feet of muscle and scars wrapped in military-grade cold weather gear. His steel-gray eyes assessing the soldiers with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to read danger in human faces. What these 10 women were about to discover would redefine their understanding of what one determined individual could accomplish with 2 decades of preparation, unlimited ingenuity, and an obsessive dedication to protecting others from the kind of disasters that turned heroes into legends and legends into lifesavers. The San Juan Mountains of Colorado stretched endlessly under a sky that promised nothing but punishment, where elevation sickness could kill the unprepared and weather patterns changed with the lethal unpredictability of a loaded weapon. The year was 2019, and climate change had made mountain weather increasingly violent and unpredictable, with storm systems that could drop 3 feet of snow in 6 hours and create whiteout conditions that lasted for days. The region was sparsely populated with isolated communities that depended on their own resources during emergencies, because help was often days away, even under ideal conditions. Bear Mackenzie's cabin sat at 9,000 feet elevation, positioned with the tactical precision of someone who understood that location could mean the difference between life and death when the mountains showed their true fury. The nearest town, Silver Point, was 15 miles down a winding mountain road that became impassable during severe weather, leaving its 847 residents completely cut off from the outside world when storms like this one struck with their full force. Thomas Mackenzie had earned his nickname Bear during 3 tours in Afghanistan, where his unit had specialized in mountain warfare, and his ability to improvise solutions to impossible problems had saved lives countless times. The defining moment of his military career had come during a 5-day siege in the Hindu Kush, where his engineering skills and tactical planning had kept 43 soldiers alive in conditions that should have killed them all. But the experience had also cost him everything he held dear. His wife Sarah had died in a car accident while he was deployed, and his daughter Emma had been raised by grandparents who blamed him for choosing military service over family responsibility. The cabin that appeared humble from the outside was actually the visible portion of a complex survival system that Bear had spent 20 years constructing his guilt over failing to protect his family, driving him to create something that could protect others when conventional systems failed. He lived completely off-grid, his Social Security checks and military pension funding, an obsession with disaster preparedness that had consumed every waking moment since his retirement. The local authorities knew him as a harmless eccentric who occasionally helped with search and rescue operations, but they had no idea of the scope of his preparations or the sophisticated equipment he had assembled. What made Bear extraordinary wasn't just his technical expertise or his military training. It was his ability to anticipate disasters that others couldn't imagine, and his compulsive need to prepare for scenarios that seemed impossible until they happened. His workshop contained equipment that he had designed and built himself solutions to problems that emergency services didn't know they had, and contingency plans for situations that existed only in his tortured imagination. But his greatest strength was also his greatest weakness, his inability to form lasting relationships with people who might not understand his obsession with preparing for the worst possible outcomes. The central challenge that would define this story was more complex than simple survival in extreme weather. It was about learning to trust others after years of isolation, accepting help from people who might not understand the scope of the dangers they faced, and choosing between personal safety and the welfare of strangers who had no idea they were in mortal peril. Bear's struggle was to overcome the paranoia and social isolation that had protected him for 20 years while sharing knowledge and resources that he had hoarded against disasters that others couldn't imagine. The 10 soldiers faced the challenge of earning the trust of someone who had learned to depend only on himself, while proving that they could handle responsibilities that would test their courage, their training, and their commitment to protecting civilians who had nowhere else to turn. The conflict would escalate when they discovered that their own survival was just the beginning of a much larger challenge that would require all of their skills working together to prevent a catastrophe that could destroy an entire community. The opportunity for Bear's 20 years of preparation to finally serve its intended purpose came when Staff Sergeant Maria Santos pounded on his door with fists that had lost all feeling, her voice barely audible over the howling wind as she shouted the words that every soldier learned but hoped never to use. "We need immediate shelter. We have injured personnel and we're not going to make it through the night." The sight that greeted Bear when he opened the door was both familiar and heartbreaking. 10 women in military gear, their faces blue with cold and their equipment covered in ice, looking exactly like the soldiers he had failed to save during his own disasters overseas. Without hesitation, he stepped aside and began the process of treating hypothermia victims, his hands moving with the precision of someone who had performed these procedures under fire. "Get them inside," he barked to Santos, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect in life or death situations. "Strip off the wet gear, get them into dry clothes, and start warming procedures immediately. We've got maybe 30 minutes before the serious cases start showing cardiac symptoms." The soldier's initial reaction was gratitude mixed with curiosity about the man who had materialized from the storm like a guardian angel. But Santos's experienced eye noticed details that didn't fit the image of a simple mountain hermit. The cabin was too well organized, too thoroughly equipped, and too strategically positioned to be the refuge of an ordinary survivalist. Bear's strategy for handling 10 unexpected guests during the worst storm in decades required him to access resources that he had hoped never to use, revealing the first hints of the extraordinary preparations that lay hidden beneath his modest cabin. The plan involved not just treating immediate hypothermia, but preparing for the possibility that the storm could last for days, requiring food, water, and shelter for 11 people in conditions that would challenge even his extensive preparations. "This storm is going to get worse before it gets better," he told Santos as they worked together to treat the soldiers who were showing signs of severe exposure. "The weather service is calling for another wave of snow tonight, and the wind is going to make it impossible to travel for at least 48 hours. We need to prepare for an extended stay." The preparation process began with Bear opening storage areas that revealed supplies that seemed impossible for one man to have accumulated medical equipment that rivaled what the soldiers had seen in combat hospitals' communications gear that was more sophisticated than their own military radios and survival supplies that could sustain a much larger group for weeks. But the most impressive aspect of his preparations was the systematic way he had organized everything, with contingency plans for situations that seemed to anticipate every possible disaster scenario. "Where did you get all this?" asked Specialist Jennifer Chin, her engineering background allowing her to recognize the sophistication of the equipment they were using. "This isn't civilian gear. This is military-grade hardware that's been modified for specific applications." Bear's response was evasive, but revealing 20 years of planning for the worst-case scenario. "You learn to think ahead when you've seen what happens when people aren't prepared." The soldier's first glimpse of Bear's true capabilities came when he opened what appeared to be a simple storage closet, to reveal a stairway leading down into a complex that extended far beneath the cabin, the underground bunker illuminated by LED lighting that ran on solar power stored in battery banks that could operate for months without external power. "Jesus Christ," whispered Sergeant Patricia Rodriguez, her voice echoing off concrete walls that had been reinforced with steel beams and equipped with ventilation systems that could filter chemical and biological contaminants. "This isn't a cabin, it's a fortress." The bunker contained workshops, storage areas, and living spaces that could accommodate dozens of people for extended periods. But the most impressive feature was the communications center that monitored emergency frequencies, weather data, and news feeds from around the world. The setup was so sophisticated that it made their own military communications look primitive by comparison. "How long have you been building this?" Santos asked her tactical mind, already calculating the resources and time that would have been required for such a project. "Started the day I got home from Afghanistan." Bear replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned that preparation was the only defense against a world that seemed determined to destroy everything he cared about. "Figured if I couldn't protect my family, maybe I could protect someone else's." The soldier's first real test came when Bear's monitoring equipment detected seismic activity that indicated the storm was causing more than just transportation problems. The rapid temperature changes and massive snow loads were destabilizing the geological formations that held back the mountain reservoir above Silver Point. "We've got a problem," Bear announced, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had learned to deliver bad news without creating panic. "The dam sensors are showing stress patterns that indicate potential failure. If that thing goes, it'll wipe out the entire town before anyone knows what hit them." The revelation that their own survival was just the beginning of a much larger crisis forced the soldiers to confront the reality that their rescue had placed them in the middle of a disaster that could kill hundreds of people. The situation escalated when Bear's communication attempts with Silver Point revealed that the town's emergency services were completely overwhelmed by the storm. With power outages, communication failures, and snow depths that made travel impossible for conventional emergency vehicles. The mayor's phone is dead, the police station isn't responding, and the volunteer fire department's vehicles are buried under 6 feet of snow. Bear reported after trying every emergency frequency he had available. "Even if we could warn them about the dam, they don't have the equipment to evacuate the town or the expertise to assess the structural integrity of the reservoir." The soldiers realized that their training and equipment made them the only hope for a community that had no idea they were in mortal danger. The third challenge emerged when Bear's detailed analysis of the dam's condition revealed that they had at most 12 hours before catastrophic failure became inevitable. But the storm conditions made it impossible to reach the town using conventional transportation methods. The access road is blocked by avalanches. The helicopter landing zones are unusable due to wind conditions, and the terrain is too unstable for vehicles. Bear explained while pointing to topographical maps that showed the full scope of the challenge they faced. "We're going to have to improvise a solution that doesn't rely on outside help, because there isn't going to be any outside help." The soldiers found themselves facing a mission that would require all of their training, all of Bear's preparations, and a level of cooperation that none of them had imagined when they first knocked on his door. The pressure intensified when Bear's monitoring revealed that the storm was not just continuing, but actually strengthening with wind speeds that would make any rescue attempt suicidal, and snow loads that were accelerating the dam's structural failure. The Weather Service data showed that they were dealing with a once-in-a-century event that was exceeding all previous records for intensity and duration. "This isn't just a bad storm," Bear told the assembled soldiers, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had studied weather patterns for decades. "This is the kind of event that changes landscapes and destroys communities. The dam wasn't designed for this kind of stress, and it's going to fail whether we do something or not. The question is whether we can give the town enough warning to save lives." The psychological pressure was even more intense than the physical challenges. Bear had spent 20 years preparing for disasters, but he had always imagined working alone or with a small team. Managing 10 soldiers while coordinating a rescue operation that required split-second timing and perfect execution was testing his leadership skills in ways that his military training hadn't prepared him for. The soldiers faced their own pressure as they realized that their survival training and combat experience had prepared them for many things, but not for preventing civilian casualties on this scale while operating in conditions that made conventional rescue operations impossible. The breakthrough in Bear's relationship with the soldiers came when he was forced to trust them with information and equipment that he had guarded jealously for 20 years, revealing the depth of his preparations while accepting that he couldn't handle the crisis alone. His transformation from isolated survivalist to team leader required him to overcome paranoia and social anxiety that had protected him from disappointment, but also prevented him from forming the relationships that the current crisis demanded. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," he told Santos during a quiet moment as they planned their assault on the dam crisis. "But I always thought I'd be doing it alone. I'm not sure I know how to be part of a team anymore." Santos's response revealed her own growth as she learned to see past Bear's rough exterior to recognize the dedication and expertise that had created the resources they now desperately needed. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to inspire confidence in desperate situations. "We're soldiers. This is what we do. But we need your knowledge and your equipment to do it right." The conversation marked the beginning of a partnership that would combine Bear's technical expertise with the soldiers' training and discipline, creating a team that could tackle challenges that neither could handle alone. The situation reached its most dangerous point when Bear's sensors detected the beginning of the cascade failure that would bring down the dam within hours, while the storm reached its peak intensity and made any rescue attempt seem impossible. The convergence of natural disaster, technological failure, and human desperation created a perfect storm that would test every aspect of their preparation and training. "The seismic readings are off the charts," Bear reported, his voice tight, with the strain of watching 20 years of preparation come down to a single moment of truth. "The dam's foundation is shifting, and once it starts moving, we'll have maybe 30 minutes before total failure. After that, the town gets hit with a wall of water that will destroy everything in its path." The soldiers watched their equipment readouts with growing alarm as they realized that their rescue mission had become a race against time, with the lives of 847 people depending on their ability to overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. The challenge ahead would require not just courage and skill, but the kind of desperate innovation that happened only when failure meant watching helpless people die. "This is what I've been preparing for," Bear said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of guilt and determination. "But I never imagined I'd have this much help when the moment finally came." The crisis exploded when Bear's monitoring equipment detected the catastrophic failure sequence beginning at the dam. The sound of groaning concrete and shifting earth, audible even over the howling wind as 20 million gallons of water began testing the structural integrity of walls that had been designed for normal weather conditions rather than the unprecedented stress of the current storm. The seismic readings spiked as the dam's foundation began to shift, creating fractures that would propagate through the entire structure within hours and release a flood that would destroy everything in its path. "We've got massive structural movement," Bear announced, his voice carrying the controlled panic of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment but had hoped never to see it. "The dam's foundation is compromised, and the water level is rising faster than the spillways can handle. We're looking at total failure within 6 hours, maybe less." The soldiers' response was immediate and professional, but the scope of the disaster was beyond anything their training had prepared them for. Staff Sergeant Santos began coordinating evacuation procedures while the engineering specialists tried to assess whether there was any way to prevent or delay the dam's collapse, but the weather conditions made conventional rescue operations impossible. The town has no idea what's coming. Bear continued his monitoring equipment, showing that electrical power was out throughout Silver Point and that emergency communications were completely down. They're probably worried about staying warm and keeping their roofs from collapsing under the snow load. They don't know that they're about to be hit by a tsunami. The convergence of natural disaster, infrastructure failure, and communication breakdown created a perfect storm that would require every resource Bear had accumulated and every skill the soldiers possessed. But success would depend on their ability to work together under conditions that would challenge even their combined expertise. The moment of truth came when Bear and Santos were forced to choose between attempting to warn the town using methods that might not work and trying to prevent the dam failure using techniques that had never been tested under real-world conditions. The choice was complicated by the fact that both approaches required all of their available personnel and equipment, making it impossible to pursue backup plans if their primary strategy failed. We can try to reach the town using the emergency broadcast system. Bear explained, his voice carrying the strain of someone who had run out of good options. But the power grid is down, most people's radios are dead, and the ones who do hear the warning won't have any way to escape because the roads are impassable. The alternative was to attempt a desperate engineering solution that would require the soldiers to rappel down the dam face in hurricane-force winds, place explosive charges with surgical precision, and create controlled breaches that would release pressure gradually rather than allowing catastrophic failure. The plan was technically feasible, but practically suicidal, requiring skills and equipment that pushed the limits of what was possible. "We can't save everyone," Santos said, her voice carrying the weight of command decisions that would haunt her regardless of the outcome. "But we can't save anyone if we don't try. What do you need from us?" Bear's response revealed the depth of his preparation and the scope of his commitment to protecting strangers who would never know his name. "I need you to trust me completely and follow my instructions without question. This is going to require precision teamwork under conditions that will kill us if we make even small mistakes." The decision to attempt the engineering solution rather than the warning approach was based on cold tactical calculation. They had the skills and equipment to prevent the disaster, but they had no way to guarantee that warnings would reach the people who needed them most. The turning point came when Bear revealed the full scope of his preparations, opening storage areas that contained equipment specifically designed for dam repair and flood control, proving that his 20 years of obsessive planning had anticipated even this seemingly impossible scenario. The discovery that he had explosives, underwater gear, and specialized tools for exactly this kind of emergency transformed the mission from a desperate improvisation into a carefully planned operation that had been rehearsed countless times in his imagination. "You planned for this?" Santos said, her voice carrying amazement and respect as she studied the detailed diagrams and contingency plans that Bear had developed for dam failure scenarios. "You actually planned for this specific disaster?" Bear's response revealed the depth of his guilt and the scope of his dedication to preventing the kind of losses that had defined his military career. I've been planning for every disaster I could imagine because I couldn't live with myself if people died because I wasn't prepared. This is why I've been living like a hermit for 20 years, for this moment when preparation makes the difference between life and death. The realization that their rescue had brought them to someone who had spent decades preparing for exactly this crisis gave the soldiers the confidence they needed to attempt an operation that would either save 847 lives or kill them all in the process. The preparation for the most dangerous rescue operation any of them had ever attempted required Bear to share knowledge and equipment that he had guarded jealously for 20 years, while the soldiers prepared for a mission that would test every aspect of their training under conditions that exceeded the worst-case scenarios they had studied. The plan required them to descend the dam face in hurricane-force winds place, explosive charges with surgical precision, and create controlled breaches that would release pressure gradually rather than allowing catastrophic failure. The explosives have to be placed in specific locations to create fractures that will direct the water flow away from the town. Bear explained, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had studied every detail of the dam's construction and failure patterns. Too much explosive force, and we'll trigger the catastrophic failure we're trying to prevent. Too little, and the pressure buildup will overwhelm the structure anyway. The soldiers' preparation combined their military training with Bear's specialized knowledge, creating a hybrid approach that neither could have achieved alone. Each team member was assigned specific responsibilities based on their skills and experience, but the success of the operation would depend on their ability to work together with the precision of a Swiss watch, while battling weather conditions that made communication and movement nearly impossible. The tension reached its peak as the soldiers prepared to rappel down the dam face in conditions that would challenge experienced mountaineers under ideal circumstances, while Bear's monitoring equipment showed that the structural failure was accelerating faster than their most pessimistic projections. The window for successful intervention was closing rapidly, and any delay would make the operation not just dangerous, but impossible. Wind speeds are gusting to 70 miles per hour. Bear reported, his voice barely audible over the howling storm. Visibility is near zero, and the rock face is covered with ice that will make anchor points unreliable. You're going to be working blind in conditions that would normally ground all outdoor operations. The soldiers' response was professional, but grim, their faces showing the strain of people who understood that they were about to attempt something that had never been done before under conditions that would kill them if they made even small mistakes. The stakes were no longer just their own survival, but the lives of 847 people who had no idea that their fate was being decided by 11 people they had never met. Remember, Santos told her team, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had led soldiers through impossible situations. We're not just trying to save a town, we're proving that preparation and teamwork can overcome any obstacle when people are willing to risk everything for strangers. The descent began with Bear and Santos leading separate teams down opposite sides of the dam, faced their rappelling equipment tested to its limits by wind gusts that threatened to slam them into the concrete wall or tear them away from their anchor points entirely. The sound of the storm was deafening, making communication impossible except through hand signals and radio transmissions that were often lost in the static created by the electrical activity in the storm clouds. Team Alpha is in position. Santos reported, her voice crackling with interference as she and her team reached the first explosive placement location. Beginning charge preparation now. The work required absolute precision while wearing heavy gloves and fighting wind that made it impossible to maintain steady positions. Each explosive charge had to be placed with surgical accuracy, the timing sequences programmed to create the controlled failure that would save the town while avoiding the catastrophic collapse that would destroy it. The complications began when Specialist Chen's rappelling equipment failed during a particularly violent wind gust, leaving her dangling from a backup safety line while the primary anchor point began to show signs of stress under the unprecedented load. The rescue of one team member while continuing the explosive placement required split-second coordination between teams that could barely see each other through the blowing snow. Chen is down. Bear's voice cut through the radio static, his tone calm despite the desperate nature of the situation. Rodriguez and Martinez, maintain your positions. Thompson and Williams, secure the rescue line. We're not leaving anyone behind. The rescue operation within the rescue operation consumed precious time, while the dam's structural failure continued to accelerate, forcing Bear to make real-time adjustments to the explosive placement plan that would compensate for the delays while maintaining the precision necessary to prevent catastrophic failure. The soldiers' training in combat engineering proved invaluable as they improvised solutions to problems that had never been encountered in training exercises. The decisive moment came when Bear's monitoring equipment detected the beginning of the final failure sequence, forcing him to make the choice between waiting for perfect placement of all charges and triggering the controlled breach immediately with the explosives they had already positioned. The decision would determine whether their desperate gamble would save the town or simply delay the inevitable catastrophe by a few minutes. "We're out of time," Bear announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. "The foundation is shifting faster than we projected. We have to trigger the breach now or risk losing everything." The soldiers' response was immediate and professional, their training taking over as they prepared for the controlled detonation that would either vindicate Bear's decades of preparation or prove that some disasters were beyond human ability to prevent. The final countdown was conducted with the precision of a military operation, each team member confirming their positions and equipment status, while the mountain itself seemed to tremble under the weight of the approaching catastrophe. "All teams prepare for detonation," Santos commanded, her voice carrying across the radio frequencies with the authority of someone who had learned to inspire confidence in desperate situations. "Remember, we're not just trying to save a town. We're proving that preparation and courage can overcome any obstacle when people are willing to risk everything for strangers." The breakthrough came when the controlled explosions created exactly the pressure relief that Bear had calculated, the water beginning to flow through the planned breach points in measured quantities that would reduce the stress on the dam structure while avoiding the catastrophic flood that would have destroyed Silver Point. The success of the operation was immediately apparent as the seismic readings showed the dam stabilizing and the emergency pressure gauges indicated that the crisis was being resolved. "It's working," Bear announced, his voice carrying amazement and relief as 20 years of preparation finally achieved its intended purpose. The water flow is following the planned channels, and the pressure on the primary structure is dropping to manageable levels. We did it. The soldiers' celebration was brief but heartfelt, their professional satisfaction mixed with the emotional release that came from knowing they had prevented a disaster that would have killed hundreds of people. The operation had succeeded beyond their most optimistic projections, proving that proper preparation and skilled teamwork could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. The town of Silver Point would never know how close they had come to complete destruction, but the 11 people who had prevented that disaster would carry the knowledge that their courage and preparation had saved 847 lives during one of the worst storms in recorded history. The immediate impact of the successful operation was the stabilization of the dam and the prevention of a flood that would have destroyed an entire community. But the deeper significance was the proof that proper preparation and skilled teamwork could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Bear's 20 years of obsessive planning had finally achieved its intended purpose, while the soldiers had demonstrated that their training and dedication could be applied to civilian rescue operations with the same effectiveness they had shown in military settings. The storm continued for another 18 hours, but the crisis had passed, and the town of Silver Point survived without ever knowing how close they had come to complete destruction. The immediate aftermath of the dam rescue operation brought changes that extended far beyond the prevention of a single disaster to reshape how emergency services approached mountain region catastrophes. Bear's bunker and his preparation methods became the foundation for a new approach to disaster preparedness that combined individual initiative with institutional resources. While the soldiers' experience demonstrated that military training could be effectively applied to civilian rescue operations under extreme conditions. The town of Silver Point was quietly informed about the near catastrophe after the storm passed, leading to infrastructure improvements and emergency procedures that would prevent similar crises in the future. Bear's role in the rescue was recognized by state and federal emergency management agencies, who began consulting with him on disaster preparedness protocols for isolated mountain communities. Most importantly, the successful operation validated Bear's 20 years of preparation while providing him with the human connections he had been missing since his retirement. The soldiers' respect for his expertise and their gratitude for his protection gave him the sense of purpose and community that had been absent from his life for decades. The long-term impact of the rescue operation extended throughout the emergency management community and into military training programs, where the story became a case study in improvised disaster response and the importance of individual preparation as a complement to institutional resources. Bear's bunker became a model for private disaster preparedness, while his techniques for monitoring and responding to infrastructure failures were adopted by emergency services throughout the Mountain West. The relationship between Bear and the soldiers evolved into ongoing collaboration that combined his technical expertise with their operational experience, creating training programs that prepared both military and civilian personnel for disasters that exceeded conventional response capabilities. The hybrid approach they had developed during the crisis became the foundation for new doctrines that emphasized the importance of individual initiative, working in coordination with institutional resources. The soldiers' experience with Bear's preparation methods influenced their own approach to disaster readiness, while their military training helped him understand how to share his knowledge more effectively with people who hadn't spent decades preparing for worst-case scenarios. The partnership that had begun with a desperate rescue operation evolved into a model for how different types of expertise could work together to protect communities from disasters that seemed impossible to prevent. Bear's transformation from isolated survivalist to community protector was complete but ongoing, requiring daily choices to trust others with knowledge and resources that he had guarded jealously for 20 years. His relationship with the soldiers provided the human connections he had been missing since his retirement, while their respect for his expertise gave him the validation that his preparation had been worthwhile. The man who had spent 2 decades preparing for disasters in isolation had learned that the most effective disaster response required not just individual preparation, but the kind of teamwork and trust that could only be built through shared challenges and mutual respect. Bear's story became a testament to the power of preparation, the importance of thinking beyond individual survival to community protection, and the possibility that the most important contributions to human welfare often come from people who work in obscurity, until the moment when their expertise becomes essential. Sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones who spend their lives preparing for the moment when everyone else has given up hope. The soldiers would tell audiences at emergency preparedness conferences, knowing that their greatest victory was not just the lives they had saved, but the proof that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when preparation met opportunity and courage provided the bridge between planning and action.